Hello, everybody. Hello, everybody. Hi. Welcome to the Redbud Room and to the verbal presentations. This is Redbud, and we're doing presentations on microbial risk and treatment in WASH in emergency settings, even though not all of the papers fit into that category. So now is the time, if you suddenly discovered you're in the wrong room, to get up and leave. We won't make fun of you. My name's Clarissa Brocklehurst. I'm going to moderate this session. The way we're going to work it is that we've got the three presenters, two of whom are not the presenters in the program, and I'll explain that in a minute. We're going to ask each one to come up and do their presentation. They're going to have about 12 minutes to present. I've got Catherine here, who's going to be a very strict and mean timekeeper. She's got nasty cards to hold up. We're then going to have a chance right afterwards for any quick questions for each one of the for the presenters. We're going to do the three presentations in quick succession. So presentation, just a couple of questions, then the next presentation, just a couple of questions. And then at the end, we're going to have about 10 or 15 minutes. I'm going to ask all the presenters to come up here, and we'll have general questions that they can answer. So if you think of a wonderful question that you wanted to ask the first presenter, but you don't think it until the third presenter is speaking, don't worry, you will get a chance to ask that question. And then I'll ask each one of the presenters to make a summing up statement. So I'm going to call on Rick Johnson first from WHO. And then after that, we're going to have from Stanford University, we have Claire Anderson, who's filling in for Winnie Zambrana. And from Tufts, we have Camille Haylan, who is filling in for Danielle Lantan. So I'll start with you, Rick. Thank you very much.
Let's see, and how do I get this going? Like that. Hello, everyone. My name is Rick Johnston. I'm from WHO in Geneva, and I co-lead the WHO-UNICEF Joint Monitoring Program for Water Supply, Sanitation, and Hygiene. And I'm going to talk to you about an assessment that the JMP has done on portable kits for E. coli measurement. Hold on, let me see my mouse here. Okay, we're good. Okay, this assessment we started because both WHO and UNICEF support government partners in collecting data on water quality, in part to inform the SDGs, indicator 6.1, but also for other purposes where water quality surveillance is needed. And we've been using a particular set of equipment, but we knew that there are other sets of equipment out there, and we wanted, one, to make sure that the set that we were using was valid and good, and two, if there might be something out there that might be better that we could switch to. So back in 2019, we developed a process to do this assessment. We looked at how other groups, EPA, ISO, have done assessments of kits. We developed a technical advisory group. Some members of that group are here today, thanks. And we put out a public call and selected a laboratory to implement the protocol that was developed. And that was KWR in the Netherlands. Then we selected a number of kits on the basis of how much they cost, their commercial availability, how much time they took, sensitivity, portability, and shortlisted kits to put through the assessment. And they were grouped into kits that worked on suspensions and colony countings. And you'll see more details about them in a minute. Then we divided the assessment into two phases. We did a first phase, which was meant to be kind of a quick screen. And it used really simple conditions. It used laboratory strains of E. coli, lab water, a limited number of replicates, just to see if this thing worked more or less. And then if it did well enough in phase one, we put it on to phase two, where we had more in-depth challenges, looking at wild E. coli, natural waters, looking at things like false positives and false negatives. So that was the process. These are the types of kits that we ended up selecting. 10 of them were based on counting colonies. Most of them used membrane filtration, but there was one product that used a gel medium to develop colonies that could be counted. And then the other 10 were based on suspension. 6 of those were presence-absence tests that usually had 100 ml volumes. And what we did to quantify them, to compare them against a reference method, we put them into 96 well plates and basically generated a most probable number out of them. But there were 4 kits that had their own system of making either a most probable number or some other way of quantifying E. coli contamination in suspension. These are the names of the colony counting and suspension kits that were assessed. Some of them are well established, commercially available. Others were more in development and kind of novel products. The one that the JMP uses for household surveys is the combination of membrane filtration and these compact dry plates. But some of these other kits are also widely used. So we were really looking at things that either UNICEF and WHO offices were in the process of using or were in our catalogs or that we might be interested in using in the future. So phase 1, remember this is laboratory strains of E. coli. We used ATCC strain 29522, one strain, pure waters. And we were really looking at recovery and assessing that by making serial dilutions, lots of different standards and triplicates, and then just putting them in a linear regression or a log linear regression to see how well they match the reference method, which was the IDEX quantitrace system. And you can see some examples of results on the left here, this novel suspension media called resirufin that we were quite keen on, performed really well. Its slope was 1. Also, we look at the linearity with measures like especially the Spearman's R coefficient, almost 1, also really good fit there. One of the commercial suspension media that we looked at is called Aquachrome ECC. And you can see it had good linearity. The Spearman's and the Pearson's R's are quite high, but the recovery was low. The slope is very significantly not 1. We had initially said the slope should not be significantly different from 1. So in this case, we decided not to go with Aquachrome to the second phase of testing, but more on how good a decision that was coming soon. So in bold, you see the ones that we did go to the fuller assessment on, 6 colony counting and 6 suspension methods. And we looked at different challenges here. We wanted to know, in the presence of non-target bacteria, are we likely to get false positives? So we would challenge them with Aeromonas or Pseudomonas or some other non-target bacteria. We also wanted to know if there's E. coli, but there's also a lot of something else like Aeromonas. Do you still get good results? And in most cases, there were no problem with the competing organisms. A few products had low-level positives, especially with Aeromonas or Pseudomonas, but no big problems. We also looked at broader ranges of temperatures and incubation times, especially if the product claimed that it could work in a particular temperature range, or it didn't need incubation or things like that. And we found, not surprisingly, that if you incubate at 25 degrees or even 20 degrees, bugs grow slower. We also found lower recovery at 45 degrees for some assays more than others. So really high temperatures can also pose a problem. For wild E. coli, we worked with 5 different natural waters and used 4 stocks using wastewater treatment plant effluent, spiked to about 330 and 3 CFUs per 100 mils. And in this case, with the wild E. coli natural waters, we found much better recovery in general than we did for phase 1. So a lot of information on that slide, don't have to digest it all. But if you look at the slope column, you can see that the slopes of those regression lines I showed you earlier really ranged a lot. So sometimes they were up to 7, sometimes they were 0. Bad news, resirufin didn't do well at all. So that one really failed, the phase 2 testing. But I want to show some examples of how the Aquagenics gel bag and the Fluidian Alert Lab did. So Aquagenics Gel, this is a new product produced by Aquagenics. We've got Mark Sabzi and I think Lisa Hirsch probably in the room somewhere. Yes, they can tell you all about this product. But what we did is we ended up having 60 paired samples ranging from 0 to 300 CFU. And we measured how well it matched risk classes: low, medium, high risk, less than 1, 1 to 10, 11 to 100. And if you first look at 20 degrees for 24 hours, see the kit doesn't work well at all. They know that. They don't claim you should incubate for 24 hours. At 48 hours, it works much better. You can use it as a presence absence test also at different thresholds. And at all 3 thresholds that we tested, quite good results at 48 hours. At 35 degrees, the 24-hour results are much better than at 20 degrees, but still a bit lower than if you would incubate for 48 hours. But the bugs just needed maybe a little bit more time to develop in some cases. The Fluidian Alert is a suspension media. It comes in this little case and it's innovative. What it does is it measures, it has a little laser that checks the fluorescence of the growth media continuously. And when logarithmic growth starts happening, exponential growth, it sets that as a time and it uses that to quantify the results. We found you can get results after just 2 to 12 hours, this one, 2 if it's really contaminated, more commonly around 10. And again, the risk class matching was good, and use as a presence absence test was, in the mid 90%. No problems with non-target bacteria. This is what it looks like. That's what that fluorescent signal looks like, and then they would peg it to that particular time. And I'm showing here for Fluidian, when we used the laboratory strain, we got really low recovery. And when we used 3 natural waters and wild E. coli, we actually got a positive bias. And one interesting discussion we had with Fluidian is that they think that their assay measures enzymatic activity, including from all the bacteria that might be clustered together. And they asked us if we filtered the wastewater effluent. We said, no, we didn't do that. And their hypothesis is that those clusters get plated as a single colony, or they land in an NPN well and count as a single result. So interesting, but I think that low recovery for the lab E. coli we saw in many cases. And I think if a test didn't do well enough in the first round, we shouldn't be too harsh on it, because I think it's really just this particular strain of E. coli is hard to grow. So for conclusions and our next steps here, I think we have some ideas about how to revise this protocol going forward. Definitely not just relying on this one strain of E. coli. It would be better to have more strains. It would be better to use more replicates at fewer concentrations to get better statistical precision. Maybe consider a coarse filtration, like a 20 micron filtration of the effluent spikes, just to get around this question of, is it particle agglomerations? And also, some of the kits that we assessed really were not commercially ready, and they were still in the development phase. They should have been screened out earlier. Also, these methods were all based on cultivation and incubation, but there are a bunch of products in the pipeline through UNICEF's innovation project and its rapid water quality testing project that Esther Shaler will be happy to tell you about. And we need a different method to assess those ones. So we've been partnering with AOAC International to develop a protocol that's fit for those innovative processes. And we do have a poster on this. It's on Wednesday. Esther has 2 posters, but you should go see her poster about fecal sludge management this afternoon. And our website is now live with the results from the Aquagenics, the Fluidian tests, and we will be putting other ones up there as the reports are finalized. So, how's my time? Sweet. Okay, I see a couple hands up. Let's take a couple questions. I see you. Okay, well, this was a laboratory assessment. So the shortlisting considered things like portability and weight, and there were criterion about how big and heavy it could be. But UNICEF is also doing some field assessment of these, and maybe Maybe I could get Esther to speak to that either afterwards or depending on how much time we have after this round of questions. Great. Hello? Yeah, we use phosphate buffered saline because we wanted the osmotic pressure to be about right. But I think it was really the case of this particular strain just didn't work well in some media. Yeah. Okay. Great. I think we're good.
Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. My name is Claire Anderson. I'm not Winnie. And I'm a fourth year PhD student at Stanford University. I worked on this project with Marlene Wolf as well, who's now at Emory. And this project is quantifying the viral reduction achieved using ash and sand as hand washing agents. So kind of moving away from the topic of water quality and more about hand washing now. As I mentioned, I'm presenting this on behalf of my colleague, Winnie Zambrano, who is the lead PhD researcher on this project. My goal for this presentation is to answer these three questions of why did we perform this study, how did we perform this study, and finally, what you should take away from this study. As a bit of background about why we wanted to perform this study, hand washing with soap and water has been proven to reduce instances of both respiratory and enteric disease. However, approximately 26% of the global population lacks access to soap and water for hand washing. And this map shows that that burden is not evenly distributed across the world. Areas in blue are where there's a high proportion of access, and areas in red is where there's a low proportion of access. And in these low resource regions, people may turn to hand washing alternatives, including the use of ash or sand instead of soap. And that's what I'll be discussing in this presentation. We decided to focus on ash and sand in this project because it has a rich history of being recommended and in use. In the early 1990s, there were a few field studies to determine the amount of bacteria that these hand washing methods removed. And the results from those studies were generally positive. And so based on those studies, in 2002 and in 2009, the World Health Organization recommended the use of ash or soil in place of soap in low resource regions. And in recent years, WHO as well as UNICEF have recommended the use of ash and sand for COVID-19 prevention. However, something that we failed to ask before making these recommendations, especially for COVID-19, is how well do ash and sand perform against viruses specifically? And part of that performance is how well they remove viruses from hands in a controlled laboratory setting. So that brings us to the aim of this study, which is to quantify the reduction in viruses from hand washing with ash or sand compared to hand washing with soap and water for 20 seconds. To achieve that aim, I'll now go through a brief experimental procedure that we used. We started off by, the experimental procedure involved the use of volunteers. So we first decontaminated the volunteers' hands and then applied two types of viruses to their hands, including Phi6, which is an enveloped virus, and MS2, which is a non-enveloped virus. And we use those two types in order to capture a wide range of viral characteristics. After applying the viruses to the volunteers' hands, they then performed one of 7 different hand washing methods, including a no-wash condition. And the methods that we chose to look at were the use of water only for 20 seconds, the use of soap and water for 20 seconds, the use of ash and water for 2 different time variations, 5 seconds and 20 seconds, and the use of sand and water for 2 different time variations, again, 5 seconds and 20 seconds. After the volunteer performed one of those hand washing methods, we then recovered the virus that remained on their hands and quantified that through plaque assays. We then repeated that for each hand washing condition with a total of 15 volunteers. And these are the main results from 5-6 for that study. So it's only one of the viruses that we looked at. And I'll walk you through this graph now. So along the y-axis are all the log reduction values. And a log reduction value is basically our way to quantify the number of viruses that were removed by each hand washing condition as compared to the no wash condition. And in this study, I'll be referring to a higher log reduction value as the hand washing method being more efficacious and basically being a better hand washing method overall. You'll also notice a dashed line at the log reduction value of 2, and that's because the US Food and Drug Administration recommends a minimum criteria of 2 log reduction values for an adequate hand washing method. Looking at the actual graph, we have the experimental data points from each volunteer for each hand washing method, and then overlaid on top of that is a box plot with the dark line showing the median and the rest of the plot showing the range. And then moving from left to right, you can see that we have the use of water only, followed by the use of soap and water, followed by the use of ash for 5 seconds, ash for 20 seconds, sand for 5 seconds, and sand for 20 seconds. And the main things that I want you to take away from this graph are that all of the alternatives are above that recommended criteria of 2 log reduction values. Additionally, just looking between water and the use of soap and water, we found that those were statistically similar. And we also found that the use of soap and water was similar to the use of alternatives if they were used for 20 seconds. This next graph is the same layout, but for the other virus that we tested, MS2. And what you might have noticed is that there's an overall shift down in the log reduction value and in the efficacy of these hand washing alternatives. And now some alternatives, specifically those that the use of ash for 5 seconds and the use of sand for 5 seconds, are now below that recommended criteria of 2 log reduction values. However, again, looking at water and soap and water, we found that those were still similar, and the use of soap and water is still similar to the alternatives if they're used for 20 seconds. Those results can help us answer this question of, are ash and sand effective hand washing alternatives against viruses? And from this controlled laboratory study, we found that yes, they were as effective as using soap and water for 20 seconds, but only if used for that longer duration and not for the shorter duration of 5 seconds. However, we also found that there was no additional viral reduction compared to the use of water only. So that's something to consider. And again, this part about this experiment, which looked at the viral efficacy of these hand washing alternatives, is just one part of what makes a successful hand washing alternative. And in reality, as I mentioned in the introduction, ash and sand are already in use and being recommended. So for future study, we might want to focus on, could these hand washing methods behave differently in the field versus our laboratory study? Are there other variables that we controlled for that may affect the efficacy of these hand washing alternatives? And then what are the potential risks of hand washing with ash and sand? Potential risks could include things like skin irritation or recontamination of hands due to pathogens in the ash or sand that would be present in the field and not in our laboratory study. And these 2 questions are particularly important, I think, when we raise the question of either changing or continuing to recommend these hand washing alternatives. Okay. Lastly, I'd like to thank the team at Stanford and Emory that I worked with on this project. The manuscript is to be published in the American Journal of Tropical Medicine and Hygiene later this year. And if you have any further questions beyond this presentation, you can either contact me or Winnie about that. Yes. Yeah, so yeah, that was so the material composition of the ash and sand is something that we looked at in this study. So thank you for asking about that. We looked at pH and the material composition size. So the pH of ash was around 12 pH and the pH of the sand was around 6. The ash particles were very small, I think around 10 micrometers. And I don't exactly remember the properties of the sand, but it was Ottawa sand and playground sand. So just typical sand that you would find around. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's definitely, so the addition or recontamination of hands from these materials is a concern in the field, definitely. The materials that we used in the lab, we purchased from a supplier and then autoclaved to ensure the health of our volunteers and to make sure that our experiment wasn't conflicted with that. But I think it's definitely a concern in the field. Okay. Yeah, it was from the no wash condition. So our recovery from what we spiked was about 3%. So there was like a 2-log reduction from what we spiked to what we recovered. And then everything that you saw in the log reduction graphs is compared to the no wash condition. Yeah. Okay. Oh, yeah. It was tryptic soy broth, basically salty nutrient water. No detergent. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Okay, hi everyone. So my name is Camille Hailen. I'm from Tufts University, doing a postdoc. And I'm here on behalf of the WASH in Crisis research sector to present you, to describe you how we are currently generating a research agenda for the sector. So what's the rationale for creating a research agenda? So there are currently more than 2 billion of people affected by natural disasters, threatened by natural disasters or displaced. And we also expect to see more complex emergencies and also the climate change to increase the scale and the impact of those emergencies. And therefore, with the growing number of people at risk, evidence-based strategies to provide interventions are needed to prevent and control communicable disease. And this is why there is an increased focus on research on humanitarian WASH, and also an increased funding on research on humanitarian WASH, but we are still missing opportunities to learn from ongoing interventions. And therefore, this is why establishing a research agenda for the sector is necessary, because of the challenges of conducting high quality research in those contexts, and therefore the need to understand what are the gaps, the needs and the priorities for the sector. So therefore, the goal of this project is to generate a consensus-based research agenda that can steer the WASH in humanitarian crisis field up to 2030. And we really want to try to strategize where the funding for research should go, where the actions should go for the coming years. And so consensus here is really the aim of the game, because we really want to set priorities that come from the sector. And we hope that by doing that, this will foster a collaborative environment, building up networks between practitioners on the ground, academics, policymakers around the WASH in crisis research. So, so to conduct this exercise, we decided to select the Child Health and Nutrition Research Initiative method, or CHNRI in short, which is a transparent, consultative, and comparative process that has been refined over the years, tested by many different sectors and for different kinds of topics. And the CHNRI process is a 10-step process, and I'm going to walk you through this process and describe you what are our preliminary results. So the first step of this process is to select a team of process managers who will steer up this process and who will work as an advisory group. And in this exercise, we selected 6 managers with different interests and visions for the WASH in crisis sector. And then to inform the listing of research options, we conducted a literature review on WASH in crisis, reviewing existing systematic reviews and also more than 400 articles on WASH in crisis. And we also conducted 23 key informant interviews with multiple stakeholders associated to the WASH in crisis. We also did consultations with technical working groups of the Global WASH Cluster. And we did that to understand the questions as they see are the priorities and they would like to put forward in the coming years. Then the next step is to ask, is to define the criteria to judge the research questions from a list of criteria provided by the CHNRI process. And so we asked our process managers to select which criteria they thought would make sense to judge the questions. And in this exercise, our managers have selected 5 criteria, including the impact the research would have to improve the humanitarian response outcomes, the answerability of the research within the context and the timeframe set for this project, the relevance of the research to answer a relevant evidence gap, the potential for translation of this research into feasible solution, and the implementability of this research into a concrete solution. After that, we also ask our process managers, to define the context for this research agenda. So for whom, where, when, and for what outcomes we wanted this research agenda be appropriate to. And what they decided is that this research agenda should be appropriate to anyone, any country, any communities affected by humanitarian crisis, but also at risk of humanitarian crisis. That the research could be appropriate to any geographical level of focus. So it could be a research, a multi-country research, also research for a specific region in a specific country. They also decided that the research could address any types of outcomes. So for example, health outcomes or human rights-based outcomes or behavioral outcomes, and that the research should be answered by 2030. With that in mind, with all the information we gathered, we are starting to create a systematic listing of research options. And we got a list of more than 900 research questions that we had to reduce, right? And so after removing research questions not related to the humanitarian context, after removing duplicates, etc., we got down to a list of 250 research questions. But that was still a lot to answer within the 8 next years. And so to reduce this list of questions, we involved 2 different groups of people. One, academic groups, and we provide this list of 250 questions, and we ask them to refine and rephrase the question, as they're usually used to do, right? And then we provided the same list of questions to an operational group, and we asked them to check if those questions make sense for the sector, were relevant for the sector. And by doing that, after final revisions, etc., we had a list of 130 questions coming from the WASH in crisis sector to put forward to the WASH in crisis sector. So the next step of the Chenery process was to ask people associated to the WASH in crisis sector to judge those research questions. And we did that through an online survey. So we asked people to judge how each of the 130 research questions may meet each of the 5 criteria previously selected by the research managers. By answering yes, maybe, or no. And so we distributed our survey through our existing networks of people, trying to reach as many people as possible, but also trying to reach people with a broad range of organization type, geography, and areas of expertise. And so the survey was circulated over a 3-month period. And during this time frame, we got 286 surveys with answers to some or all the research questions. And we compiled the demographic from those surveys from those respondents. And here are the main demographics we wanted to show you. So the first one is a graph about the organization types. So you can see here that all the organization types were represented in our sample of respondents, with more than half of the respondents working for an international or a national NGO. In terms of regions of focus, all the regions were also represented. And we had more respondents focusing on the African or the Eastern Mediterranean regions. And in terms of areas of expertise, so we classified our 130 questions into 17 WASH interventions categories. And so you can see here that our respondents had expertise in all types of WASH programs and WASH interventions categories we tested. So with those results, we feel that the survey reached people reflecting a broad range of organization, geography, and areas of expertise, and that the result of this survey should provide a reasonably balanced picture of the priorities across the sector. After that, so with the answers of the online survey, we had to calculate a score. So we used this nice formula to get 1 score for each of the 130 research questions. So all the yes, we put 1 point to the yes answers, 0.5 points to the maybe answers, and no point to the no answers. And this gave us a score between 0 to 1 that we were able to sort from a higher score to a smaller one. And from that, we were able to have a list of the priorities according to the respondents and then to the WASH in crisis sector. So those are our preliminary results. So I'm running out of time to describe you this list of the 10 prioritized research questions according to the respondents. But those are only preliminary results. And what I wanted to show you is that those 10 priorities are for 4 different WASH interventions categories that are the distribution of non-food items, the WASH programs in general, questions related to the improvement of the access to and the use of sanitation facilities, and also related to the behavior change interventions to improve hygiene practice. So as I said, those are only preliminary results, and we still need a few weeks, a few months to analyze those scores, but also to stratify those scores by gender, organization type, regions of focus, because maybe that the priorities are not the same for someone working in the African region than someone working for the Eastern Mediterranean region. So we really want to stratify and see if this list of priorities would change from one group of people to another. And then we want feedbacks from the technical advisory groups to get the reflections on the priorities, to make sure that those priorities make sense for the sector. After that, this is the end of the Chenery process, of the 10th step of the Chenery process, but actually that's just the beginning of the project. Because after that, we want to disseminate this list of priorities to the respondents, to the academics, but also to the donors, to see if we can align our priorities or the priorities of the sector with their own research plans, and if we can, for example, incentivize for some funding calls. After that, we will keep on disseminating, and then we will ask people to pick up research questions and start working on this project. So I'm sure you will hear from us in the next couple of months, next couple of years. And so if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. Otherwise, we have created a specific email address for this project, which is emergencywash.research@lshtm.ac.uk. So feel free to email us, to ask us any questions, to provide comments, suggestions, to help this research agenda to move forward. So I really thank you for your attention. Is there any question? Clear enough?
The research institutions were interested in following up research requests. Is there going to be a process of identifying, this group of universities will this question, or is it just going to be a free for all?
Yeah. The idea is, yeah, it's going to be free. So, so the question was, then will we distribute the research question by academics, etc. So, no, it's going to be free, open to all, and so people will be able to pick any questions.
I'm not worried if there's duplication of different universities.
Hopefully, people should communicate. It's a small world, but that's yeah, that's something maybe we still need to think about. So we are still thinking about the next steps, how to make this moving forward. So that's a good point. Thank you. Any other question? No? Perfect. Thank you.
There might be some questions. Like, yeah, very special. My mother's been Okay, so I'll just open it up. We've got everybody plus a bonus panelist. So Esther, I can answer questions related to the first presentation. Esther, do you want to remind everybody who you are?
Yeah, I feel like I've been in every session today, so apologies if you're having too much of me. I'm Esther from UNICEF. I work at Supply Division on product-based innovation, and we're working on rapid water quality testing with WHO, and whether or not we can get products that can give us a time to result for E. coli in the field within 6 hours.
Okay, so I'll open it up. If you have a question, let me know who you would like to answer it. Oh, come on, wake up, all of you. You must be burning with questions. Good, thank you.
Yeah, I think you captured that well. Just going over a bit of history, I think you're correct in that hand washing with ash might have been considered equal to hand washing with soap, but a lot of previous studies only looked at bacteria. And we're just starting to delve into the realm of viruses and specifically enveloped viruses, which don't have the same characteristics. So I think we can definitely consider hand washing with soap and water for 20 seconds or 40 seconds, as the CDC recommends, as the gold standard that should be recommended, and then considering these other alternatives in low resource settings. And they might not perform as well for all pathogens, but they're better than nothing.
Sounds like a JMP question as well, so
Yeah, if I can
you're on
follow
the
up on
spot.
that. So in the context of SDG monitoring and the global indicator on basic hygiene, well, there was no hygiene indicator in the MDGs, so the question didn't arise until 2015. And since the SDGs, hand washing with water and soap, or the access to water and soap and hand washing facilities in the home has been the definition of the basic services. So if there's only ash or sand available, that would count as a limited service, and that hasn't changed since 2015. I also want to just jump in because I thought it was interesting that you pointed to some WHO or WHO and UNICEF guidance promoting hand washing with ash. And I looked up the COVID guidance that came out in 2020, and it did say that the ideal hand hygiene materials in order of effectiveness are water and soap or ABHR, ash and water alone. And then it goes on to talk about, like, if water and soap aren't available, then ash is better than nothing. And even water alone is better than nothing. And it seems like that's consistent with your results. It seemed like the time actually was more important than the hand washing agent. Yeah, interesting.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that point that viruses are very diverse and that they react to hand washing differently. The two viruses that we chose have been used as models to pathogenic viruses pretty frequently. And the reason why we used MS2 and Phi6 and not like COVID-19 or or influenza or a pathogenic virus is because we were working with actual volunteers. So that's why we chose those surrogates.
I think Danielle had a question at the back. I think it'd be good if you could come up to the mic, because otherwise I think nobody can hear the question.
I would have given it to
You could be loud. You could be loud.
Good, thank you. I just wanted to add something quickly, which is I think every organization, World Health, CDC, UNICEF, has multiple recommendations for hand washing in the public health emergency sector, in the SDGs. So it's really important to think like what Rick is going to use for the SDGs might not be what's recommended in a COVID emergency. And when we talk about things like ash and sand, and maybe Marlene wants to talk about it, it's often in the, if you don't have soap and you're in COVID or Ebola, is ash and sand going to be enough? That may not be something we want to count to the SDGs, which I understand, but the research is also important. And it's, we've talked like CDC, World Health, there's recommendations all over the place. And aligning that is really important as we think about the development versus the public health emergency context. So I just, there's.
Yeah, let me just add that Claire has a poster on Thursday. She has another project where she looked at hand washing efficacy, and there's more in there about like the different time of hand washing with soap, hand washing with water alone, all that. So it's great to hear that there's interest in this evidence and how it can support different types of guidelines, like Danielle's saying.
And that one actually has my name on it, so you can find me on Thursday.
Excellent. Other questions? We dragged Esther up here, so surely somebody wants to. Do you want to come back to that? Okay.
So someone asked about whether ease of use was a consideration for the testing. So the list was done collaboratively between UNICEF and WHO around products that we already use or have an interest in. And the ease of use assessment is something, ease of use and portability, I think were the two, weren't they? Yeah. So the portability and ease of use, we have a protocol for evaluating when we go to the field in future with these. Acquire, who don't seem to be in the room, have just used it for the first time, and I haven't had the feedback, but that protocol can be available if anyone's interested. But I also want to highlight that WHO and UNICEF collaboratively are working on a portable field testing kit guide, which will come out early next year, all being well. And it will address all of these elements as well as procurement and consumables, which is the other part that we haven't really discussed at all today. And I feel like I should have said more on. But the reality of these test kits in terms of consumables is something that we need to look at more, and supply chains and considerations. So keep your eyes out for the new guide that will be coming out. It's going to be awesome, not because I'm writing it, because yeah, but it is going to be useful, I think, because a lot of the questions that commonly come up should be addressed.
Mark,
So no one stepped up to the mic, and I will. I'm Mark.
good. Thank you very much. Keep us entertained.
North Carolina, including with the Water Institute. To follow up on the prior points, the aquagenics tests, both of them, which you've heard about, are described more thoroughly in a report, which includes things like ease of use, portability, etc. So go there and you'll find more information about those points. From my perspective, I created these two tests because my goal was simplicity. And so you can all be the judge of that, but it was intended that these two tests be utterly simple to use in the field at ambient temperatures. But read the report, because I think there's favorable information in there about this. This is not a plug for the company, but I do like these tests, not just because I developed them, but because the first one, the CBT, which was developed more than a decade ago, is widely available, and there's probably lots of users here who can give you more information if you haven't heard of them before. The gel test is new, so we're always interested in. I'm the scientific director of the company. I'm not sales and marketing.
Thank you. Okay. Any other questions? If no other burning questions, nobody's bouncing up and down in there. I'm standing between this group and a glass of wine, which is, yeah, dangerous. So I'm just going to ask everybody at the panel to make one last statement. It can be goodbye and you know, have a nice happy hour if you like. But if you have something that you wanted to say and kept to the last, should we start down at the end and just to sum up? Takeaway message. What would you like everybody to walk away with?
Come to my poster on Thursday. No, but really, if you have any further questions, you can chat with me. I can tell you about MS2. Yeah.
So my takeaway is that we will release the list of the priorities for the WASH in crisis research agenda soon. And so hopefully you'll be able to pick some questions and to work on those projects.
I have two. This discussion about hand hygiene is really interesting. And tomorrow afternoon in this room at 1:30, there's a session on strengthening norms and policy frameworks to drive acceleration towards universal hand hygiene. WHO is in the process of developing guidelines for hand hygiene analogous to the ones we have for drinking water quality and sanitation and health, so that all these questions about efficacy and efficiency will feature in that document. For the lab assessment, I'm mostly really happy to have it done because this is actually the third conference where I've said we're doing this assessment and finally I have results to share. Thank God. But also really happy to say that a lot of the kits did really well, including the one that the JMP uses for household surveys. Woo! But also there were some other kits that did really well. Aquagenics, Fluidian, 3M Petrofilm has an E. coli specific test that did really well. Hydrogen sulfide did really well, and it wasn't supposed to because it's not specific to E. coli, but we did it in MPN, and it like did really well compared to the wild E. coli. So MPN H2S, anyone? I don't know.
So I'm also really glad that Rick is finally presenting results because it's been a long time coming. So that's great. I have a poster on Wednesday. You can see the cat for real life. Yes, this cat is the theme of our posters. Don't ask me why it seemed like a good idea at the time. It is my fault, I know. And also, yeah, that's it. Come to my poster on Wednesday or one today on FSM and emergencies. I cover everything, you know, one end of the spectrum or the other.
So with that final shameless plug, thank you all for the shameless plugs, and thank you to everybody for this session. Let's give the presenters a round of applause.